And I'm pleased to say Heidi joins me now. Heidi, good morning.
Hi there, Paul.
Should unaccompanied child refugees from Europe be allowed to settle here?
Absolutely.
Well, why didn't you vote for it?
Well, I abstained, and I'll explain why, because I've had a few people question me about this, although what's interesting is that, you know, there were actually very few, I don't even know the numbers, Conservative MPs, I think only five voted with. I'm not sure however many abstained. The reason I did it was because I have been working with the immigration ministers to try and persuade them to find a way through this. And it's this really horrible kind of political balance you have to find. If you rebel totally all the time, they don't listen to you. They sort of write you off as well. We can't negotiate. We can't, they're not one of our own. She's rebelled. We won't talk to her. And I knew that amendment that had come from the Lords, worded as it was, I knew that wouldn't get through the House.
Very close, though, wasn't it?
No, 18 is actually quite a reasonable size majority.
You only need 9 to vote the other way, don't you?
Well, but I knew it wasn't going to happen, and I was actually watching. I was standing in between, so I had a view of the two entrances to the two voting lobbies and mentally counting how many were going in. And I'd spoken to lots of colleagues during the day, and I knew we weren't going to win it.
So you thought you were being, clever, or you were putting politics before your conscience?
No,
not
at all, not at all. God, my conscience would have had me flying straight through that door. I was being, unfortunately, what you have to also be is not just courageous and emotional. You've got to be a bit practical as well and understand how the process works. And I knew, because it wouldn't get through in the Commons, it would bounce back to the Lords. And actually, if people read or listen to the end of my speech, I actually put a plea to the Lords, send it back, send us a new amendment.
See, Steve was quite complimentary about you. He thinks you've got a good conscience and you stand up for what's right.
Absolutely, and I do, every time.
But sometimes you have to stand up for what's right on the day. Why didn't you on this day? I understand everything you're saying, but if your conscience is fricking you so much...
That's why, because I knew it would come back again. And if it came back again, I had to be able to have an open line of dialogue with the ministers, which I now have, because the Lords have done what I hoped they would, and they've sent a softer amendment back, and we're going to have that back in the House, I think not next week, but the week after. So had it been the final vote, end of the day, nowhere to run, absolutely, I would have gone through that yes lobby. But I didn't. And I knew it wasn't the end of the road, and I would have burnt my bridges, and the ministers could have treated me as an out-and-out rebel, and then wouldn't have talked to me when it came back to us.
Even the Daily Mail were critical of what happened.
I have to say, I think it was a brilliant article. Brilliant article. I saw somebody posted it to me on Twitter last night, kind of, an early sort of shot of it as the next day's paper. Absolutely brilliant. I'm not normally a massive reader of the Mail, I have to be honest, but I thought it absolutely summed it up perfectly. And we're now, I feel, in a significantly stronger position. Myself and a couple of colleagues are already trying to work on the wording of the amendment when it comes back. We're talking to the Public Bills Office to get make sure we use the right legal language. We are in a significantly stronger position now that when it comes back to the Commons, I am convinced we will get it through.
Do you think
that's what I've been doing.
Do you think the wider public support what you're doing?
I do, yes, absolutely.
Because I have to say, most of the people getting in touch with this show this morning say, look, the old arguments surface every single time. We're full up, we can't afford it, look after our own kids first. I'll read you a few comments. 96,000 children in care homes here, what about them? These children are in France, why aren't the EU or the French looking after them? Chris says, can you ask Heidi Allen how we can take on all these refugee children? We have so many people on the streets who are homeless. And it goes on and on and on that. And many people are saying, yeah, we feel sorry for these kids, we really do. But it's not our problem. Yeah, and I don't. To be fair, I don't hear much of that in South Cambs, but I know some people do feel that way. And what's interesting is it's really sort of geographically biased. It depends where you live and what your experiences are locally about the level of immigration you see or the level of people waiting for housing, etc. First and foremost, why don't the countries look after them? Where they are. Well, they do have, if you have refugees in your country, you do have a responsibility internationally to look after them. That isn't happening as well as it might. I've seen it firsthand in Greece. So we're having to pick up the slack, are you saying? Say this again, sorry, Paul? We're having to pick up the slack for places like France and Greece. Not at all. What I was going to say is that people who say that first and foremost are right. The reality is it's not happening because Europe is being caught like a rabbit in the headlights. It's happening now, but it's taken longer than it should. That aside, there are children throughout Europe who do have a legitimate right to claim asylum in this country. If they call it Dublin 3, it's a piece of legislation. If you have a family member here already, in any European country, you can claim asylum there. And they're the kids I want us to get to.
In Calais alone, some volunteers have identified, I think it's 150-something, children who do have a legal right, but because the host country are overwhelmed, not managing the system properly, these kids are just sort of drifting, literally, in camps, in tents, with no shelter, nobody safeguarding them, nobody looking after them, and I want us to get some bodies on the ground to find them and help them with the process. And that's, so they're not, I don't see those as extra. They're children who have an absolute legal right to be here. We have to go and find them and bring them home, and I feel absolutely determined we're going to do this.
It's rather than, it's a moral thing, isn't it?
It is, absolutely moral. Yes, we have waiting lists for housing. Yes, we have difficulty with, in some of our cities, homelessness. But they're issues we have to fix anyway, and we must fix them anyway. But that should not stop us from being compassionate about these children who have absolutely nothing. The stories I could tell you, Paul, would blow you away.
No, I've seen them, and I'm slightly taken aback by the lack of compassion this morning. I understand where people are coming from, but I look at the children and I see my daughter.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wonder if we'd do it if it was the streets of Cambridge or the streets of Peterborough.
Precisely, and I think I'm sure I popped that in my speech, that absolutely, that if it was on the streets of Britain, there would be an absolute outrage. These children have absolutely nothing. They cling to you, go there, and they grab onto you. I don't know. I don't have children of my own. I never think I'm a terribly good kind of child magnet. I think I'm better with kittens, but they're so happy to see a friendly face. They cling to you.
The worry is, though, for many of our listeners that, the children are going to come, the brothers, the sisters, the uncles, the aunties, and, we're going to end up overflowing all over the place. That's the worry because of people's experience perhaps of immigration, particularly in the north of the county.
Yeah, and that's why I go back to that point I said earlier about the geography. Where you live really shifts your opinion on this. I suppose 2 points on that. One, the majority of children that we are, I think we should seek to find are unaccompanied. There's a clue in the name. They have nobody left. Their villages, their homes have been bombed. There's nobody left behind them. So a lot of them are completely on their own. Those that we can, over a longer term, find some kind of family members for them. Well, goodness me, if we can't fit another few hundred here to help those children in the UK, then I think there's something morally wrong with us. And actually, having family around them releases the burden on social services and the local authority. A child on their own, of course, needs much more assistance from the state, if you like, than if they've got family. So helping to, if they do have any, a couple of people in the world that they might have left, why would we not allow them to come here too? And the other point to make is this, the government have been, I think 1,000 have come already of this original 20,000 that we promised to take. And the reason it's felt a little bit slower than those of us that would like to see it happen more quickly, the reason it's been slower is because the government is working really closely with local authorities to make sure that they're being housed in areas with the correct infrastructure, with enough housing. It's why we've not had the knock on the door in South Cambs. Our public transport is so weak, the last thing you want is refugees that can't get out and about and end up just having to stay indoors.
And that's the worry for a lot of people, that we're going to get a knock on the door in Peterborough and surrounding areas again, and that's not what they want.
No, but the government is working directly. I know Lewis Herbert from the City Council had a meeting with the minister responsible specifically for resettlement, Richard Harrington. He met him, I think, a fortnight ago. And these are one-to-one dialogues between council leaders and the government about what can you take, what's your infrastructure like, can you manage, how many. So they're not being forced, if that's the worry that people have. They're going, because it doesn't work if there isn't the infrastructure and the welcome in place for them. So the government's doing it slowly, but they're getting it right and making sure that they go to, areas that can truly look after them.
Heidi, thank you for that. Heidi Allen, MP for South Cambridgeshire, explaining her decision to abstain in that vote on unaccompanied refugees earlier this week.